So Ben Shapiro was on Yale College campus just yesterday, marking the October 7th first anniversary of that horrific tragedy that occurred in Israel. And he was asked by a student challenging him as to what exactly is Israel's endgame. What does, victory, long-term peace look like? How will that come about? I want you to see Ben Shapiro's, first the question from the student and then Ben Shapiro's response, and then we'll react to it. Have a watch.
Hello. You quoted or mentioned a book earlier. I didn't quite catch it when you were talking about how peace can only be achieved through victory and defeat.
Long-lasting peace, yes.
Long-lasting peace. Okay. And I was also hoping if you could give an example of a relevant example of such victory and defeat, and then talk about what victory and defeat would look like in this case with Israel and
Sure.
Gaza.
Okay. So the author is, I believe, Jeffrey Blaney. The book is The Causes of War by Jeffrey Blaney. The perfect example, obviously, is World War II. So World War I actually ends with a negotiated end, right? World War I is negotiated, and everybody's like, "Oh, the Versailles Treaty, it's so terrible. Look how it incentivized Germany to then have to pay reparations, and then that leads to World War II." And so look how if everybody had just been nicer to Germany, World War II never would have happened. The argument Blaney makes, which is a pretty convincing one, is that we were a lot meaner in World War II when the West and the Soviets completely invaded and then parceled out the entirety of Germany. And there hasn't been a war in Germany since, as it turns out. Examples from the Middle East would include Israel's signal defeat of the Egyptian army in 1973. So Israel fully defeats the Egyptian army after they take their best shot in 1973, and the Egyptians decide at that point they do not have the ability to defeat the Israelis, and then they sign a peace agreement with the Israelis. So Jordan, same sort of thing, right? Jordan attacks in 1967. In 1967, Israel defeats them. The Jordanians never go to war with Israel again. So these are not just relevant examples, these are relevant examples from the region. Okay, so if you're talking about how do you achieve long-lasting peace in this particular region, first of all, Israel has achieved a pretty long-lasting cold peace with Egypt and with Jordan. They're achieving a much warmer peace with Bahrain, UAE, and they will with Saudi. I have full confidence. If you're talking about how do they achieve a long-lasting peace with, say, Lebanon, the answer is going to have to be such devastatingly effective military victory that there is likely a regime change that ends with some form of actual military governance in Lebanon sufficient to withhold power from Hezbollah, which, by the way, was supposed to be the case after 2005 when Israel 2006 when Israel withdrew from southern Lebanon. There's a UN resolution. I don't give a shit about the UN. The UN's a terrible place and it's filled with terrible people. But the UN resolution 1701 says that southern Lebanon was supposed to be completely demilitarized and UNIFIL was supposed to maintain control, and that never happened. So the only way to actually achieve long-lasting peace is by crushing the hopes and dreams of people who wish to attack their neighbors in such devastating fashion that they have no choice but to negotiate a peace. And so when it comes to Gaza, Israel has done that with Hamas. The only way Israel is going to be able to maintain that, unfortunately, Israel's desperately trying to find somebody to run the Gaza Strip. They offered it to Egypt. He was just like, are you kidding me? No way. They offered it to Saudi. Saudi doesn't want any piece of it. They offered it to Jordan. Jordan doesn't want any piece of it. No one wants a piece of the Gaza Strip, nor have they ever, by the way. Israel never wanted the Gaza Strip. In 1967, there was an open debate inside the Israeli cabinet whether they even had to go into the Gaza Strip, with most people arguing that if they could get away with not going in there and leaving it in Egyptian hands, they would do it. Okay, the Gaza Strip has always been a trouble area. So Israel's going to have to probably militarily occupy the area and pacify it in a counterinsurgency operation for the foreseeable future until they're able to negotiate a broader peace in which somebody is willing to accept some responsibility there.
I think that's a really great response to that question. And the fact is that in previous wars, and perhaps at previous times, there's been a sense of, we'll just try and, some people called it mowing the lawn. Some people said it's just getting rid of particular acute security threats, but we're just going to, unfortunately, have to allow deeper problems to fester. It's become clear in the aftermath of October 7th, you cannot allow security threats, indoctrination threats to just fester, because if you do, then over time, you're going to have much worse problems. This is one of the problems we have in the Western world, is we are so short-termist. They say, ceasefire now, let's stop escalating, let's de-escalate, and they think that that's somehow a form of kindness and mercy. It may seem like it, but it's actually not, because what happens is you just delay further problems and violence in the long term. There's more about what Ben says that I want to unpack, but just before I do, I want to bring your attention to something really important. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which is the current stage of the Jewish year that we're in right now, we're encouraged to reflect on who we are, the kind of person we want to be, the kind of nation we want to be. And we're encouraged to do things like teshuvah, which means introspection, prayer, connecting to God, our spiritual identity, tapping into what our lives are really about, and also moving beyond ourselves, looking outwards at the wider world and thinking, how can I actually give and benefit, be of benefit and blessing to others? And when we look at that third category of charity, we often think about, there's so many causes out there. How could I pick one that I think is really going to have a big impact? And we also have to allocate a resource. I'm going to be in one place to give of my time. That means I can't be somewhere else. Or I'm going to have to give clothing to someone, which means that I can't give it to someone else. But imagine if there was a resource that was actually sitting there, being unused, untapped, that could go towards charity, towards those in need. Well, Leket Israel, which is Israel's largest food rescue organization in Israel, does just that. And I want to just take a moment to tell you about them very briefly. They are an organization that rescues food that's perfectly nutritious, in fact 100% nutritious, often given to people who it will be their only meal of the day. And they rescue food surpluses that exist in hotels, army bases, in farms that Israeli farmers just, it's not economically viable for them to be using it. And so they take the food, and they don't discriminate based on any kind of background that you have in Israel, and they feed based on need. They've got the most incredible network of volunteers, and since October 7th, they've had over 70,000 volunteers from around the country volunteering in the field, logistics centres with farmers. They're distributing daily hot meals to those in need, and the demand has grown a lot. 40% since the war began, demand has increased. And they're putting a lot of focus into supporting the Israeli farming community, purchasing produce, providing grants, loans, vouchers, and volunteers during their time of need. What an important organization that's tapping into a resource that's already there, surplus food, and distributing it to people in need who are struggling right now. Please do consider donating to them, particularly at this auspicious time. There's a link in the video description to go to Leket Israel and give them a donation of any amount. I can tell you and assure you that this is a highly worthwhile cause that will be supporting Israel and the Jewish people in a challenging time for them. But now going back to the video, one thing that Ben Shapiro, I think, so rightly says is that people sometimes think that if people have a grievance, then you need to somehow cater to it. And the argument they make is, well, look, Germany was so punished in World War I. So look what happened. They got the rise of Hitler, people were upset. And say the same again now. We can't go too hard in Gaza or Lebanon because you'll just create a new generation of terrorists. To which, of course, Ben responds, yeah, but look at World War II. And then we completely demolished the threat, and you had a new generation that were more moderate in Europe. I think ultimately the big question comes down to, what is the grievance? Is the grievance a legitimate grievance? Or is it something that's not legitimate? So if Germany's grievance is that we want European domination and we want to expand our borders, that's not a legitimate grievance. And if the grievance of these Arab terrorist organizations is we wish to annihilate Israel, and we're not okay with the Jewish people re-establishing sovereignty in their ancient homelands, we're not okay with Jewish people being safe and living, sorry, that's not a legitimate grievance. And one of the foolish things that's happened in the West is that we have become lulled gullibly into a belief that the Palestinian cause is really just about self-determination and wanting a state of their own and just lamenting occupation. There was no occupation prior to 1967, and the Arab nations and armies tried to destroy Israel. They tried to destroy hopes of an Israel before Israel was even created. So it's clearly not about occupation. I, just as much as anyone else, want to see a long-term plan that can allow for everyone to have rights and share similar privileges and not have to be under military occupation, all that kind of thing. But the question is how, and the question is what is the root cause? And it seems to me that anything that tries to appease the cause of the quote-unquote Palestinian side is simply encouraging them to continue their cynical ploy, their narrative which they use as a cynical ploy to get rid of Israel and to undermine Israel. All the issues they lament, occupation, war, checkpoints, wouldn't exist if they said, we'll make peace with Israel and the Jews, but they don't. And so therefore, Israel needs to get a bit more imaginative in thinking up a new way of moving forward, because it's clear that the two-state solution, all it does is feeds the fantasy of wanting to get rid of Israel. It's also clear that, frankly, they consider themselves Arabs, not as a distinct national identity, and therefore the whole cause of Palestinian statehood is not really a legitimate one. It's also clear that there is a Palestinian state already, Jordan, which is majority Palestinian, run by a non-Palestinian minority, which no one seems to care about, which is very bizarre, and proves the double standards towards Israel. But the point is that ultimately Israel needs to really find a new path forward in resolving this issue, because she doesn't want to be occupying people who don't share similar rights, but at the same time, she can't just say, well, we'll cede this territory. So creative ideas are coming up, and I'm hopeful that there's going to be different, innovative solutions to these issues. But as Ben says, appeasement is, the case of history is so clear, appeasement cannot be the answer. All it does is delay and expand violence and problems further down the line.